few minutes late, so I'm going to go ahead and start this. The first I need to do is read the mayor's call for the special session. It's dated October 24th, 2019. Honorable members of City Council, in accordance with Virginia Beach City Code Section 2-21, by the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Virginia Beach, I hereby call for a special session of the Virginia Beach City Council to hold public briefings on the Dome Site Atlantic Park Development Agreement and stormwater operations and maintenance, Tuesday, October 29th, 2019, 2 p.m., City Council Chamber, Building 1, City Hall, 2nd floor, 2401 Courthouse Drive. Following these briefings at 4 p.m., City Council will recess and convene into closed session to conduct interviews of firms for the city manager search, and it's signed by Robert M. Dyer, Mayor. So, with that, we have a roll call, Madam Clerk.
Sure. Mr. Berlucci?
Here.
Mr. Tower?
Here.
Ms. Wooten?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson? Mr. Wood?
Here.
Mayor Dyer's absent, well, late. Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Ms. Henley? Present. Mr. Moss? Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Rouse?
Here.
8 are present.
Okay. Mr. City Manager? Ready to go?
Vice Mayor and members of council, so the first presentation up is a presentation of the Dome Site or the Atlantic Park Development Agreement, and we have Deputy City Manager Ron Williams joined by Michael Culpepper from the Venture Reality Group.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor, members of council. Today, I have the pleasure of presenting to you the collective effort of many people to bring a 25-year vision to reality. With this project, we have an opportunity to leverage our natural, built, and financial assets to maximize our potential. For this agenda item, Mike Culpepper of Venture Realty Group and I will provide an overview of the proposed development agreement for Atlantic Park. Before I begin, I should recognize the leadership of council members Louis Jones and Guy Tower and former council member John Earn for serving as liaisons to the project, and project liaisons from the Virginia Beach Development Authority, Chairwoman Dot Wood, and former members Linwood Branch and Jerry Miller. I'd also like to say thank you for the supporting roles of the City Attorney's Office, the Budget Office, the Communications Office, the Departments of Finance, Cultural Affairs, Planning, Economic Development, Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Singer Davis Law Firm. In February 2017, at the direction of the City Council, the VBDA issued a request for a letter of qualifications for development of the land assemblage commonly referred to as the Dome Site. Responders were encouraged to demonstrate their ability to transform this site into a family-friendly, unique, mixed-use destination that would include a 3,500-person entertainment venue, unique or new-to-market retail, unique or new-to-market authentic restaurants, residential but not as a primary use, entertainment concepts, and year-round programming attractive to both locals and visitors alike. As you know, amongst applicants from across the country, Virginia Beach's very own Venture Realty Group was selected as our preferred development partner. In January of this year, the City Council and the Development Authority approved a 9-binding term sheet outlining the summary of basic terms of a possible development agreement. The developer and city staff negotiated over the course of a 10-month period to arrive at terms for a binding contractual agreement, and that negotiation is complete. I invite Mr. Culpepper up to provide an overview of the Atlantic Park project, and then I will follow with an overview of the development agreement.
Thank you all. Good afternoon. Vice Mayor Wood, members of City Council, thank you for giving me the opportunity to once again talk to you about the Dome project that we call Atlantic Park. I am Michael Culpepper. I'm one of the managing partners of Venture Realty Group, and I'm here along with our other managing partners, Donna McMillan, John Gibson, and Bruce Berlin. And we are very proud and honored to come and speak to you once again, our third presentation to City Council. And for those of you who may not be as intimately familiar with the project, or for those who are watching at home who may not have had the benefit of the prior presentations, we want to give a little bit of background about the project. When we first started this process about 2.5 years ago, we wanted to do something totally unique and different at the Virginia Beach oceanfront. We wanted to redefine the resort area. And our charge was to extend the tourist season, to create a year-round destination that was vibrant and fun for our tourists. We gave ourselves the charge of also making our project attractive to locals as well. We wanted to give our friends and neighbors in the city of Virginia Beach and regionally a reason to come back to their oceanfront. And then when we connected with our partner, Mr. Pharrell Williams, he challenged us to make this project a part of a transformation of the oceanfront. Make it fun, inviting, and welcoming to all people, tourists and locals alike. And the rendering that you see projected on that screen achieves those goals. But along the way, a couple of really interesting things happened. The first thing that happened was that we started talking to folks. We spoke to a lot of folks, and there are people who are very passionate about the Dome site, either because they went to go see the Stones or the Beach Boys on that site, or they drove by it every day. They wanted their input as part of the overall vision for the project. And you will see that input from folks injected into these designs and these renderings. That was part of a very substantial public engagement process that we will tell you a little bit more about and that we're very proud about. The second thing that happened, which was critical to this project, was something in the water. And as many of you know, during our initial conversations about this project, the questions and concerns about College Beach Week were raised in the background, in part because of our close proximity to the oceanfront. It was natural to talk about College Beach Week in the context of this project. And so what Pharrell Williams saw was an opportunity to help create an event that would promote a positive change at the oceanfront. And so we worked with Mr. Williams to deliver something in the water, which by all accounts has helped reshape perceptions of the city of Virginia Beach oceanfront and of our greater city on an international stage. And so the tone and the message of something in the water is just a hint of what we envision and what Mr. Williams envisions for the Dome development project. We want to take the positive energy and the goodwill of something in the water and inject it into a living, breathing, 24/7 vibrant development so it can serve as a catalyst for something positive for the oceanfront and for the greater city. And so with that, a quick intro of our greater project team. You know us, we're Venture Realty Group. Many of our team is seated behind me. You also know Mr. Williams, who is an active member of our project team, and a host of other teammates, deal participants, civil and design professionals, all of whom have collaborated with us now for 2 years plus in pursuit of this opportunity to serve the city. You may recall the original renderings and some of the 3D modeling that we did that depicted some of the earlier incarnations of that site. You'll recall that it has many of the basic project components that you see today. It has the structured parking, the entertainment, office, the experiential retail, and of course, the surf park. The project that you originally saw had to evolve, and it had to evolve because of this extensive campaign of public engagement. Many of you have been there throughout these 2 years of talking to folks about this project. We've had over 50 public and civic engagements with folks who were stakeholders and folks who were just interested in having their thoughts introduced as part of the development process. We had an extensive survey with 2,500 responses and 1,400 written comments. The feedback that we had received, not just from the survey, but also from social media, is quite literally rendered in these iterations of the design project. The things that we learned from that public engagement period were that there was a strong emphasis and a desire for the structured parking at the oceanfront. There was a strong emphasis on entertainment, and not just the entertainment inside of an entertainment venue, but also those indoor attractions that allow our tourists, our visitors, to have things to do in the off-season. And lastly, it emphasized the popularity of the surf park. And the surf park is something that has caught the imagination of a lot of folks. And we have to answer lots of questions about the surf park, and we love to do it because it's such a fun part of what we plan on delivering to the city of Virginia Beach. As part of this process, we did extensive homework. We had 6 feasibility studies, all of which are available online, and you can review for yourselves to see how this project works from an economic perspective, to the entertainment venue, to the the retail and parking, all of which has provided us with a wealth of data that we've been able to use to ensure that we're delivering a finely calibrated project that fits our needs for the site. And as part of that study, we spent a great deal of time with our friends at WAVEGARDEN. WAVEGARDEN is the technology provider for the dome site, and the images that you see on the screen are not those photorealistic renderings that you're used to seeing. These are actual photos of the first public lagoon that WAVEGARDEN has introduced in Bristol in the United Kingdom. Last week, they opened for surfers, and in Melbourne, Australia, they're currently opening and churning waves right now. So you can now get a feel for the visual spectacle that that surf park represents. And why our project is unique is that this visual spectacle is embedded in a unique mixed-use development project. When we first released these images, quite honestly, they went viral. And we received feedback from all over the world for a project design and a concept that has never been introduced inside of North America or beyond. And so we listened, we evolved a plan, and we present it to you today along with a development agreement. And this development agreement establishes the business terms by which we hope to develop this project. At the end of the day, what we're doing is using tourism revenues, whether they're revenues from the TIP fund or whether they're revenues that are generated from our project, and we're going to do 4 basic things. First, we're going to build public assets, like public parking, like streetscapes, like an entertainment venue. Secondly, we're going to develop a world-class destination, like what Mr. Williams and our team envisions to help transform the oceanfront. Third, we want to generate general fund and school revenues immediately on stabilized year 1. And that's something that I really want to emphasize because there is misinformation. We are not utilizing general fund revenues to develop this project. We're using tourism revenues to generate general fund revenues. And that is critical that folks understand that. And lastly, we want to spark transformation for our oceanfront and for our city at large, using the same positive energy that we were able to engender during Something in the Water inside of this 24/7 vibrant year-round development. And so, we begin with our term sheet. Our term sheet that you last saw in January identified TDFP as the mechanism for the public finance of the project. And TDFP, which has been replicated in several other projects regionally, often known as gap financing, is designed for owner-operators and not necessarily for projects like ours. It is a creature of statute, and it relies on retail sales tax. And as such, it really requires a project where there is an operator controlling the cash register that is going to collect the retail sales tax and then remit the retail sales tax. In a project like ours, where there are 20, 30, or 40 tenants and operators, all of whom have contract with us, we cannot police the collection and remittance of those retail sales taxes. And furthermore, the statute for TDFP also addresses these concerns and says that certain types of retail projects are not eligible. And so therefore, as we went through the process and we engaged consultants, we asked them, is this the best program? And the answer was a resounding, well, it's not the best program. The best alternative that we concluded with our consultants and experts was the CDA, the Community Development Authority. And y'all may be familiar with CDAs. They were enacted in 1993. The first was formed in 1998 at Dulles Town Center, and it has been used over 30 times in the Commonwealth of Virginia, by some measure over 40 times, depending on how you calculate. And what CDAs are ways to use the project's tax revenue to pay for important infrastructure inside of a given area. It's requested by the landowner, and it levies additional real estate taxes inside of the CDA district, not outside, inside of the CDA district. And it's managed by a board of directors. And in this case, we wanted to ensure that the board of directors were you, members of city council, not an autonomous authority of unelected folks. We wanted elected folks serving on the city council to serve in that leadership role. It's also important to point out what a CDA isn't. And we learned from the very first moments that we were tackling the CDA that there were folks who thought of a CDA like an economic development authority, like a redevelopment and housing authority. And it is not. The authority of a CDA is limited to the confines of the project. The 10.2 acres that we intend to develop will be the boundaries of the CDA, and all of the authority and control of that body will be limited, not just by statute, but by the contour, the boundary of that project. It's also important to know that a CDA cannot issue debt of the city, and that is specifically and explicitly stated in the CDA statute. It is not supported by the full faith and credit of the city. And so the CDA gives us solutions that we think can help promote the development of this project in a way that does not negatively impact the city. Revenues generated by the project, very important. On your screen, you see the direct revenues were approximately $8.169 million, nearly $8.2 million. These are direct tax revenues. They do not include the indirect revenues or the ancillary revenues like parking fees and leases. When you start counting up all those revenues, you get some pretty staggering numbers, over 10 million of income generated. And so this demonstrates the real power of the CDA and the project to generate revenue for the city. As part of the revenues for the city, it generates general fund revenues. What's critically important to understand, we are creating general fund revenues, not taking general fund revenues. In over 20 years, you can see the impacts are quite significant. $57 million to the general fund, $49 million to Virginia Beach Public Schools, the same public schools that produced a good portion of the development team you see behind you. And so we're fortunate to be able to present to you a project that has a dramatic positive economic impact. 3,600 jobs during construction, 2,000 jobs annually thereafter, and nearly $150 million of annual economic impact from this project. And so, in conclusion, again, we're extraordinarily proud to have this opportunity to help reshape and recontour the oceanfront. To emphasize again, we're using tourism revenues to create general fund revenues that will help sustain us for years to come. And so we thank you and look forward to the opportunity to answer any questions and address any concerns.
Yes, and my apologies for being a bit tardy, but we're open for questions right now. Anybody? Barbara?
I think we're using a rendering that's outdated. I think this initial rendering that is on this front cover includes the Methodist Church property.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
That
And
is
that is
no
no longer part of the overall project. The Methodist Church site, which we call the church block, is no longer part of the overall development.
In that slide that you had, almost the last one, maybe the next to the last, you said that, okay, that the one before that, that the economic before that, I guess, the real estate excluding CDA All right, if you're excluding the CDA, what is it that's paying real estate tax?
Well, the CDA represents the 25 cents of real estate tax over and above the dollar and a penny that's currently charged for real estate tax, which is really important for folks to understand that unlike say a TIF at the town center, where you freeze the real estate tax and then the incremental real estate tax that escalates goes in to pay for infrastructure, here we're essentially taxing ourselves at 25 cents, and as real estate values and assessments increase over time, the beneficiary of those increased real estate tax assessments, those taxes, are the taxpayers of the city of Virginia Beach. It is the general fund.
So that when you do the CDA, you're going to be taxing just the property within that area an additional 25 cents real estate tax. That's like an SSD. But then whatever the base real estate tax is, even if we raise real estate tax rates along the way, anything below that, other than that 25 cents, would still come to the general fund.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Rosemary?
Great job, Mike.
Thank you.
Has any consideration been given to because you're going to have apartments, and was it 400?
Yes, ma'am, for 436 approximately. Yeah.
To put a percentage of those for workforce or affordable housing?
Well, you've certainly asked us to consider that, and we'll consider everything, but considering the development that we have right now and the costs that we have right now, we're not currently looking at it, but we can certainly consider it.
I think we, at least in the very beginning stages, let's be thinking about that and see if we can, in the way the workforce housing works is the interiors are a little bit different than the exteriors, and so no one can tell the difference between one that's workforce and one is market rate. And yet it provides some housing for people who could really use it. And I know the Seaside Harbor has just been magnificent down there. And I think we need to look for opportunities where we can get some affordable workforce housing. And not, I mean, I'm not saying 50%, but, maybe we could look at maybe 10%.
Okay, anybody else at this point? Hey, Ron, how you doing?
Great, Mayor. So part two. Before I provide an overview of the development agreement, which I'll highlight the major components of it, I want to highlight two key provisions for the project. Mike alluded to this, and I want to mention specifically. So the public investment for the capital investment and then the return of a portion of the performance grant comes from the Tourism Investment Program Fund, or commonly referred to as the TIP Fund. The TIP Fund was established to provide opportunity for strategic investment in tourism development projects, and it's supported by dedicated revenues, as a reminder, are predominantly from hotel, meals, and amusement taxes. The second key provision is that throughout the agreement, you'll see the term authority used. And that's the Virginia Beach Development Authority, not the CDA, but the VBDA. The VBDA for the agreement serves as the contractual party, and the agreement will be administered, however, by the city as the third-party beneficiary. And there are several reasons why the authority is in this position. Number one, it owns the collective parcels known as the dome site, and so therefore the lease will be with the Development Authority. Secondly, the VBDA actually solicited, as I mentioned at the beginning, in 2017, the RFQ, and therefore the VBDA procured the parking, streetscapes, and an entertainment venue, and we need a procurement process, so that has been done. And lastly, the VBDA has the authority to enter into longer-term leases, and therefore the agreement is structured around that contractual arrangement in order to have the long-term lease that we need for this development. So we describe, some of the way to describe this development agreement is first an agreement to a process to then get to the ultimate project. And yes, Ms. Henley, we still show renderings because those are the aspirational goals of the project, while pieces and parts may move around, and we'll talk through that. The first phase is the due diligence phase. It's initially established as 9 months. It could be shorter. And we may have to agree to extend it. But realistically, what has to happen in the due diligence phase has to do with the parcels themselves. First, we need to decide what parcels. We currently have the 10 acres that the what VBDA owns. But as previous iterations of the concept have shown, where we were previously on the Methodist Church property, we know that in order to capture the amount of square footage and parking that was conceived there, we need to find an additional parcel. One of those parcels, as we know, and it was a goal of the term sheet, was to acquire the Virginia Dominion Power substation that's currently owned by Norfolk Southern, and we continue to work through the acquisition for that and the underlying fee of 18th Street. So those are the type of items, along with rezoning application, street closures, and subdivisions that are necessary. There's also a correction that I need to make in the current posted agreement, and that is there's a notion of a selection of a general contractor. That needs to be substituted for a competitive selection of subcontractors. The general contractor essentially was already solicited and procured through the RFQ that Venture responded to, because they did have W.M. Jordan as part of their development team. And so that piece has been done, and we do need to make a correction to the posted document. At the conclusion of the due diligence phase, we will establish the preliminary master plan. That will tell us the where and then the goal of the what that we're actually going to build. Then we'll move into the pre-development phase. Essentially, the pre-development phase is where we start to spend real money and start to get design, the feasibility for its construction, to aim towards to get construction drawings, and ultimately to get a development budget, the development plans, and guarantee maximum prices for the city for our purchase cost of the public assets. At the conclusion of that, we may be, for example, at some portions of it, maybe at 90% complete for construction drawings, or 95%. We need a closing and development period to finalize the documents, to secure the lease agreement, the parking agreement, the closing for the loans necessary for the construction, and then consideration whether or not how we'll move forward with the contemplated special service district. So that's the framework of the agreement that gets us to a project, that gets us to construction. Essentially 9 months for due diligence, an estimated 12 months for pre-development phase, and then perhaps a few weeks or a couple months at most for the closing and development phase. So now I'd like to touch on, so what will the project include? Again, we're moving away from a rendering, but we still have in Exhibit 3 of the development agreement the goal for the project. The private components include what Mike has discussed and shown to you with the mixed-use commercial aspects of it, Class A office space, apartments, and of course the WAVEGARDEN Lagoon Surf Park. And then the public aspects of the parking, streetscapes, common spaces, the entertainment venue, and the structured parking is estimated at nearly 2,000 spaces at this current form of development. The preliminary project plan, this is one of our exhibits, and shows that the red are the uses of the mixed use, the blue for the surf park, the yellow for the entertainment venue, and then we have the additional Norfolk Southern parcel. This area in general is where we may have acquisition of additional parcels in order to fulfill the full dream of the $325 million public-private partnership. As Mike mentioned about tax revenues and the generation, we're using the dedications that we currently have for our revenue structure in our budgets to allocate the tax revenues that will be generated by Atlantic Park. So the schools, in the first year of stabilization, it is estimated they'll receive nearly $2 million under our current dedications. The general fund, north almost $3 million, and then the TIP fund would typically receive $3.5 million. And of course, some of that is being returned through a performance grant, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So the public-private partnership, $325 million investment collectively. $230 million of that is the private partner, and then an estimated $95 million for our major three components of the project. So a carryover from the term sheet was the idea of a performance grant, an incentive to make sure that we got a high-quality, high-caliber project, but also to support portions of the project that may be less likely to receive traditional financing, and/or we needed to push the quality over and above what the market may respond to. And so previously we were consideration of the TDFP program, and the loan and the market for that would consider. And Venture and the consultants, along with ours, have agreed that for this model, for this project, that model is not the best approach. But we can still use a similar structure to what we were considering under TDFP. And so thankfully, this past legislative session, the General Assembly passed the Virginia Beach Sports and Entertainment Project Act, or commonly known in your agreement as the Knight-Wagner legislation. Delegate Knight and Senator Wagner introduced a model whereby we can capture state sales tax that would otherwise go back to the state. And so after dedications for education and transportation and the normal dedications that happen, that leaves 2.025% of state sales tax that can be returned back into the project. Additionally, we've carried forward the same components that we were contemplating during the TDFP program, and that is the equivalent of 1.5% sales tax, and then all the monies that would otherwise go to the tip that come from the amusement or admissions taxes and the meals tax. And I'll come back to the equivalent of 1.5% because that was what we would have been binding ourselves to if we were part of a TDFP program. What we had discussed so that the general fund and schools would receive the full benefit of the monies produced from sales taxes, we were willing to substitute that amount coming from the tip fund. And so we'll do a calculation based on 1.5% sales tax, but the money will actually come from the tip fund on an annual basis to provide this portion of the grant. Now, the TDFP program had basically the three-party partnership between the state, the locality, and the partner. And in the partner sense, in that term, as Mike mentioned, it was typically an access fee, and it was typically same 1.5% sales tax. Through the CDA arrangement, we're able to do the additional real estate tax, and so Atlantic Park is able to pull in a real estate tax to be that third-party partnership in providing the incentive grant, which ultimately comes from the Atlantic Park Community Development to assist with a bond financing portion of the project. So the CDA, in order to leverage the combined public and private investment, we recommend the creation of that to facilitate the development and financing of the project. It's only applicable, again, to the project components and real estate of the Atlantic Park development. No other parcels, no other owner of any real estate unless they petition themselves to join the CDA. It is only contemplated for the Atlantic Park development and the parcels that we are discussing here today. Bonds are issued by the CDA, but they are not debt of the city. The members that we recommend, the members of the CDA board be members of city council. That is eligible in the current authorization of the general by the Virginia Code. But we're asking for an amendment to make sure that the whole body of 11 members could be that board, whereas right now it is restricted to 5 members. So that's an amendment that we've asked for in our legislative package. A project construction fund will be created to pay for the other components, and that is where the form of gap financing comes in collectively when we put the private equity, the private lending, the public investment, and then this mechanism for the bond proceeds. The primary purpose of the CDA is to issue bonds to finance a portion of the parking garages and streetscapes, and then the CDA bonds will be repaid through the performance grant revenues. There will be additional real estate and emissions taxes in the CDA to support the CDA's obligations. And these special tax revenues are part of the performance grant as well, as I had in the image before you. So let's walk that through a little bit. How do we actually then take the revenues that were described in the previous image and turn it into the actual acquisition? Again, structurally, the development authorities in the city collectively provide the funding for the parking, streetscapes, and entertainment venue. It goes into a project construction fund, and then the bond proceeds from the CDA go into the project construction fund, and then you make construction draws of the $325 million together with the equity and the other private lending to actually accomplish the Atlantic Park project. So that, in high-level overview, is the structure of the development agreement to get us to Atlantic Park. Mayor, members of the council, we have proposed to you that a public comment and a public hearing be scheduled for November 12th. The public comment is a general comment on the development agreement. The public hearing is for an appropriation for additional parcel acquisition. It's contemplated by the Norfolk Southern parcel and others. We then would recommend that we schedule the vote for both the Development Authority on the morning of the 19th and for you, City Council, on that evening.
Okay, great. Okay, Aaron.
First of all, thank you, Ron, for that overview, and to venture as well, and all parties involved. I mean, it's a really complex deal, but to you all to come together and make that work for the benefit not only of our city, but for the project of all parties involved is really something else. So kudos to you for that. You mentioned earlier that the GC on this project has already been selected.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention the interest level of making sure we have minority participation when it comes to that subcontracting and all things under that. And I know we have our aspirational goal of 12% to make sure SWAM businesses have an opportunity to partake in the single largest development we have here in the city. So I'm really interested in going forward, and how do we make sure we provide opportunities for minority businesses within our city to partake in this particular development.
We do have our small minority-owned business requirements that we do for governmental procurement. It's actually an appendix to the development agreement that has that requirement. And so we will be working, those same aspirational goals will transfer to the components working with the general contractor. And yes, what we're substituting is again, when the RFQ for that the Development Authority did was for a design, build, operate team.
Right.
And so they came at that time, and so we felt like we did procure that. But we're substituting the requirement that there be competitive opportunity for subcontractors for the major trades.
Okay. And I guess the next point, I guess I'll be looking forward to an informational setting where, along with Taylor Adams of Economic Development as well as the NBC, we can get together and get an overview of this project.
And often what we do, council member, as a part of that to help foster the understanding that the opportunity is there,
Yeah.
is we will support alongside with the developer fairs so that interested parties can come. We did that with the Sports Center, last year. Make sure that it's as wide as possible and that we can help maybe get contact with some of those contractors that maybe the GC doesn't normally have contact with.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Barbara?
On this portion that the city is going to be funding, roughly 95 million, I think it's 95 and a half. Okay, the Development Authority owns this, so will they be the owner of the parking and the entertainment venue?
Yes, ma'am. Using the similar structure to what we have done for Town Center and other, yes. So what we do is through the support agreement that's a part of the development agreement, the city will then issue the funding through the Development Authority for the acquisition of those assets. Those assets are in Town Center, for example, the garages are owned by the Development Authority. It doesn't mean at some point in the future, if the city determined that they'd like to have them transferred to the city, that couldn't happen as well, though.
I know in trying to explain this to folks, I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing. So it's city money that's going to be paying for the parking, paying for the entertainment venue, and paying for streetscapes that's over and above whatever the basic is, or I've forgotten how it's worded in here.
Yes, ma'am.
But so this will be public parking?
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Some parts of it will be designated for some.
We do have opportunity for reservation of some spaces, but it'll be a significant minority of the total of the spaces that are there. And we're using the same model that we use, the shared parking model that we use at Town Center, where there is some reservation of spaces, but it is limited. The major difference here is that it will be a pay-for-park environment, not a free parking environment.
Okay, of course, well, I think 31st Street Garage is partly reserved for spaces as well, so it's.
And that model has some complexities in what can be public and what can be private and on what parcels. And so you see a lot more spaces that are reserved in the way that garage evolved. That will not be the same case that you see here that you're driving by, a significant amount of reserved spaces.
Okay, so now I know the Town Center parking is free to the public because that's a part of the SSD for town center, and the folks there pay the additional real estate tax to be able to make the parking free, but that's not happening here. So it will be charged. There will be a fee for parking there,
Yes.
even though it's public and open to the public.
That's what's contemplated, yes, ma'am, at this point, because, especially because it's part of the resort oceanfront parking system. And so it'll be modeled after our other garages and surface lots that we may retain.
Now, the other, of course, big component of the city's participation is the entertainment venue, and that's $30 million. And so this is so that we will be having this, what is it, how many hundred, 3,500?
3,500 person, yes, ma'am.
Seat entertainment venue.
Yeah.
When we built the Sandler, I know that there was a lot of angst because we were taking away the theater from the oceanfront that had been in the old pavilion and, you know, we're moving it up there. So I'm assuming this helps to make certain that we're returning that kind of entertainment or venue to the oceanfront. So it's going to be operated by someone that this Development Authority or the city is going to contract with. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. So a couple things there. Number one, yes, the Sandler Center was sized and styled to replace the Pavilion Theater. And so at 1,200 seats, albeit it was the amenities of the Sandler Center are very high quality compared to the Pavilion Theater. But the goal was for our local performing arts groups to have that opportunity. And it's given opportunity for us to attract additional acts that we wouldn't otherwise. The size, however, also constrains us. And the analysis that was done for the Sandler actually had embedded into it that part of the market analysis was that at some point the city should consider, as they called it back in 2001, a roadhouse back at the oceanfront for other general mission types of acts. This size at 3,500 is a sweet spot for acts over and above what our largest indoor venue is right now at Chrysler Hall in Norfolk, but under what an arena would be, and the types of acts that are skipping the Hampton Roads market. And so it is not a theater like the Sandler where you're going to have classical performing arts. It is more contemporary music, comedic acts, events, and sporting events that would be in this venue. The operator was part of our solicitation as well for the project through the VBDA. The operator will be contracted with the city as a third-party beneficiary. Oakview, partnering with Live Nation right now, is the contemplated operator. And we know Live Nation well. They operate our amphitheater, of course. We have great confidence that they're high caliber, high quality, world-class operator. And so we are comfortable that we can come to terms with them over the next few months for an operating agreement for the venue as well.
So it's going to be under city control?
Yes.
To be able to know what's here, unlike a previous kind of proposal that we had. This will be under city control.
The venue will. So just like the Sandler and the amphitheater and the sports center where we contract for the operator, yes, we will be the owner and we'll contract for the operation.
Now, are these amounts capped, or are they just a general estimate?
So the 30 million was the estimate. That is our cap that we have embedded into the development agreement. We also have in consideration for the operating agreement that the operator would also bring something to the table, especially for the equipment and the furniture on the insides and other amenities. So that's where we are at this point. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anybody else at this point? Rosemary?
So the 30 million that we contemplate for this venue, you think are you pretty comfortable with that amount?
It is an estimate. We have to get into design and we're going to have to realistically do some fine tuning. Thankfully, we're not building a Sandler Center. This is we're benchmarking on the Anthem at the Wharf in DC and the Roxy and Battery. And so, yes, ma'am. And so we're going to do our best we can to bring it in on that amount.
Okay, Mr. Tower.
Thank you, Ron, and thanks to everybody on the city staff and the venture side, too. It's been a real pleasure to be the liaison to this group and watch the work get done. I think everybody can take a lot of pride in what's in the professionalism and the product that's come out of it. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I know the answers to, but I just want to make sure because I hear them too. One is, will you explain so folks understand exactly what this $95 million, who's going to own the assets that are bought with these $95 million assets?
The city/development authority is the owner of those assets.
So not the developer?
Correct.
Not investors, okay, that's one thing. And the other is, who is going to be responsible for paying back the bonds that are issued by the authority?
By the CDA, the Community Development Authority.
Excuse me, the
Yes, sir.
CDA, we're trying to keep those separate.
The bonds that are contemplated there are specifically paid for by the properties within the Atlantic Park development. And so the sales taxes, missions, meals, and real estate taxes generated by those businesses will actually be pledged towards the bond note.
I think it's important. It is a complicated agreement, but there are certain basic assumptions that we all made at the beginning of this adventure. I wasn't around for some at the very beginning, but I just want to make clear that as far as I'm concerned, those have all held true and they are still true today.
Yes, sir.
Under the current agreement. Thank you.
Yes, Barbara.
I'm sorry to take up so much of the time here, but I guess we can check whatever we want, right? That's why in this estimated direct tax revenues generated, stabilized year one, you're showing a portion of the meals tax and amusement tax and so forth because you accepted that which was generated by the city properties, the entertainment venue, the taxes, the meal tax and so forth, and amusement tax generated by the entertainment venue then goes to the general fund and not to pay off the bonds, is that, or not to tip?
The dedications that currently exist for the entertainment venue come to the city. And so, yes, if there's general fund revenues, most of them are tip-oriented revenues, the admissions or amusement tax, for example, and meals tax. Anything from the entertainment venue would come back to the tip fund. So we call that out because the city is the owner with the operator that we contract with. That was excluded from the performance grant.
Right, so when you get this amount that's generated to the schools and their general fund, which you show at the very beginning, this is, I guess it's on, well, it's on page 7 here. That's how you arrive at that money going to the general fund, because it's in these properties that are controlled by the city, not that which goes from the developer's properties in the tip, to the tip. Or it goes to the general fund and the tip? Is that the way you said it?
So the project, the integrated mixed-use project, in the first stabilized year generates north of $8 million. At as long as you've got the square footages, that $325 million, the image we've been looking at, that generates $8 million collectively from all components.
Okay. So that 8 million is everything, but I know it's some places through here you say except for that which is generated by the entertainment venue.
And
So that's not this amount.
and those are modest amounts that are excluded. What we essentially the premise there, Ms. Henley, is that we were being pure to what the private developers owned components generate, get returned back to assist with that gap financing. That's what's going on there.
Thank you.
Yeah, Aaron.
Lastly, I know everyone's working hard and making sure the business side of things is done well and all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But I also just want to remind council and the general public that's listening, the social impact this type of project would have on our community. Being a resident, a native of Virginia Beach who's been here since I was a kid, the oceanfront hasn't changed pretty much. We've done some good things along the way. But I really look at this project as the tip of the spear that's going to basically really utilize the resources we have in the oceanfront and continue to grow it and do some special things there. So my hat's off again, to both parties and all interested parties involved in making sure that everyone is come to a compromise on this. A couple things I just really want to reiterate about the CDA that I think the public should really understand is that the board members will be city council as well. The CDA cannot issue any debt, which I think is really important as well, and the authority is limited to the boundaries of the project as well. And this was a crucial step to do in order to get this project, bring it to light. So again, thank you for all your hard work to Mark Stiles and the city attorney and everyone in on this project. Thank you.
Is there anybody else? You know, if I can make a comment, and I want to echo what Aaron said about thanking all the parties that put this together. It really took a lot of teamwork. It's, you know, the blend of the city resources with the developer and a number of other people, you know, in collaboration. If we can fast forward a couple of years and see what could be in terms of what we need to take Virginia Beach to the next level. And it's obviously we have to bring in those type of entities and businesses that will generate incomes to help us pay our other bills, whether it be stormwater, whether it be schools, whether it be public safety. And I think what's exciting about this project is the fact that it's generating money for our general fund and our schools using a unique formula. And in today's challenging economic times, that we have to show innovation, you know, going forward. But if you fast forward a couple of years and you see the synergy of the sports center bringing in, you know, new families and what it's going to do to bolster that area, along with the convention center, along with the Vibe Center, and then if we have a very unique entity like this, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the businesses coming in are going to be unique, so it really won't have as much a displacement factor. You know, it's going to be a true destination in terms of what, you know, what is the vision of this project, a vision. And what I see are, and how this benefits the other districts throughout the city, is really simple, that once again, people coming back to the oceanfront with parking, with things to do. And if one thing that something in the water did prove, when you give people things to do and have a real destination, it really keeps that spirit of positivity going, you know, throughout the year. And then we're going to have people living there year-round. It's going to help all the other businesses. It could be a boom to help, you know, the improvement of Atlantic Avenue, 17th Street, and going forward. But once again, to establish us as the destination, but also to send a clear and coherent message that, yes, Virginia Beach is open to business. We are open to innovative ideas, and to take us to the next level and to confront the challenges we have. But once again, I just want to applaud everybody that was involved in this project, and you know, and thank you all very much. The future is bright. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you all, you know, for participating. And now we're going to, if we can move on, Mr. Leahy, to the stormwater operations and maintenance. Mr. Johnson.
So, Mayor, you want to continue with the
Yeah,
presentation?
we'll do that here, and then
Okay.
we'll adjourn into.
So, Mayor and members of council, beginning with this meeting and for every meeting for the rest of the year, and probably a number of meetings into the new year, there'll be at least one briefing and discussion on flooding, financing of CIP flood-related projects, sea level rise, and the related issues such as operation and maintenance and water quality. So we're going to begin today with sort of with a briefing that shows you where we are today with our current CIP and what you have approved over the last several years. Just kind of bring you back to remind you where we are today, because then we're going to start a series of more in-depth presentations in the future. So I'd like to present to you our city engineer, Phil Pullen, and he will make the briefing.
Welcome, Phil.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Tom stole some of my thunder. Today is the high-level presentation of the stormwater program entering into the FY21 CIP. And coming up in the next month or so are several other stormwater presentations. we have for you. I have Phil Cutter with me today from Operations. He will co-present, and I will get right to it. Here's the agenda that we plan on following today, real briefly, high level. So our stormwater program requirements are stated as, I'm sorry, wrong one. Let's see, get out of order. Missing a slide here. All right, I'll get with you here. Sorry. Okay, these three sections of the stormwater program are what we've shown you in the past with flood control, stormwater quality, and O&M. They're fully integrated, and they work with each other. The flood control projects include water quality measures and often resolve ongoing O&M issues. Water quality projects contribute to system effectiveness, keeping pipes and channels clean. And O&M, the O&M of the system preserves flood control capacity and enhances water quality measures efficiently. So all three of these performed in concert to meet certain requirements, expectations, and compliance with state and federal mandates. So the stormwater program requirements in general are these: to fund the flood control projects, support O&M activities, and support sea level rise and stormwater modeling. I've summarized that there, but that's in a briefer fashion. So now into the FY21 CIP. This chart shows a summary of the stormwater funding in the proposed FY21 CIP. The total 6-year funding is $410 million. And this is a continuation of the strategy that Council approved last year, where we had a 3.5-cent increase, which was a total combination of ERU and real estate tax increase. This program includes that same strategy. The $410 million is distributed among the three components that you see there. Flood control is funded about 60%, $244 million. Operation and maintenance is roughly 27%, or $110 million, and water quality regulatory compliance is roughly 13%, $55 million of the total. So I want to show this slide of the major projects that we've shown before, the major 7 projects. You'll see later in my presentation where I refer to the major projects, and that are these right here that we have shown in the past. You can see from this chart shows the current total project cost of those 7 projects, along with the programmed funding, appropriations to date, the 6-year funding, and then a balance to complete. So what are our needs? These next 2 charts I'm going to show you are really the meat and potatoes of my presentation. These are the needs that we have for the stormwater program. This chart here is the flood control needs of the major projects, $446 million of needs. And how do we get to that? You can see that we have nearly $800 million of needs. That includes the $611 million from the major projects I showed you on the previous chart, plus an additional $187 million from other projects and programs with other just projects within our program. That gives you $800 million. We have $352 million funded in the FY21 CIP or appropriations to date, and the math there is a need of $446 million net of that. Now that's just the standalone flood control projects. The annual program needs are these. The 3 programs, again, flood control, stormwater, and O&M. You can see there they total a need of $52 million a year. With the FY21 CIP, we have a total of $30.5 million funded per year. That is a net need of $21.5 million. So together we have the chart before the 446 total and then the 21.5 annual need. Now let me describe the projects a little bit. The flood control projects in 3 charts. These are the 21 fully funded flood control projects in the CIP. They include a lot of the sub-projects from the major projects I showed you earlier, and they total $241 million of total project costs, fully funded. This chart shows partially funded projects in the FY21 CIP. The total balance to complete of these is $275 million. I will point out new project number 12. This is the Corps' Coastal Storm Risk Management Study, $1.5 million that we've programmed. We've called it the 3x3x3. This would be the city's share of the report that we are hoping that the Corps will do. We are a good track to make that happen, so we're programming our city share if and when that comes to pass. And this third chart here are projects that are just not funded at all. They're requested but not funded, 13. There's a BTC balance to complete of $170 million on those, and that gives us a total balance to complete of $446.5 million. That's the same number that I showed you on that previous chart. Now, stormwater quality, regulatory compliance, their program is, overarching program requirements are these. Compliance with our MS4 permit, compliance with the Virginia Stormwater and Erosion Sediment Control programs, and also to support the stormwater utility. And their program looks like this: 9 projects with a $6.75 million balance to complete. A lot of programs embedded in this. And as I showed on the previous chart, they have an annual need of about $10 million per year. And now the O&M, the third leg of the stool, if you will, I'll turn it over to Philip Cutter, who will talk about the O&M section of the CIP.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. Thank you for allowing us to come here to present the high-level view of the current stormwater maintenance program and proposed needs. This chart's a little confusing, but it kind of tells you the whole story as far as maintenance goes. We have 7 primary programs that are funded for operations and maintenance in the CIP program. They're currently listed here in numerical order of the CIP. What we did was we color-coded it also. What this shows you is our current funding in the third column there, as it exists in our current CIP, and the resulting cycle from that funding source. The next column is the desired cycle that the Department and Operations has determined that we'd like to achieve for each one of these maintenance programs. The green basically indicates that what our current our desired cycle and funding limit is. So what you can see is across the top we have the various cycle years from 95 down to a 2-year cycle. So it gives you an option to see, based off of funding level, where we would fall in that cycle for going forward. As you can see down at the third from the bottom, the stormwater pump station is our only particular program that is all green. That's for right now. We have additional stormwater pump stations coming online, and in the out years, I expect to be coming back and requesting additional funding as the requirements for those maintenance and upkeep for the PM on those pump stations are needed. The next slide is a few of our new programs that we're presenting. A couple of them have been presented in years past, and they already have CIP numbers. We've broken out a couple of maintenance projects that are quite large and took them out of the maintenance CIPs and established an individual CIP from them, which you'll see is the Pinewood Road culvert replacement, which is $1 million. That culvert has been failing for numerous years. We've been band-aiding it and patching it each year, trying to make sure we keep the roads safe. We feel that needs to be done. It's one of the access points into Bay Colony. Another individual project that we pulled out is the Arctic Avenue drainage improvements. It's the outfall system from Arctic Avenue near the Harris Teeter down at the oceanfront. That particular system is a corrugated metal pipe. It's in excess of 90 inches of diameter, and we need to do the repair on that, and it's estimated at $2 million for that. In addition with that, we'd like to become, as we've shown in the past, the cave-in. Our backlog for cave-ins in the city is about 8 months right now. We still have about a $9 million effort or bogey out there to attack that, to get the backlog to a level where we think we can address that in a timely fashion with our in-house forces. So we want to spread that over 3 years and do that. Additionally, due to the success of the off-road ditch program, and we've been getting a lot of requests from citizens for roadside ditch maintenance, one of the other options is we're putting out there is to achieve or to establish a proactive approach for roadside ditch maintenance also, And you'll see the funding request there for that we're going to be presenting. Okay, this kind of summarizes on the left-hand column, all of the operating budgets, including those in operations and maintenance and in engineering, flood control, and water quality. Earlier this year, council voted to move some of the stormwater bureaus out of the stormwater utility fund so that we could establish more debt capacity. And what you see there is our current configuration of bureaus. There are 2 of those that are left in the stormwater utility. The top one, the $13 million for operation and maintenance. And then the 5th one down, I believe, is the $1 million for inspection and spills. Those 2 are the only 2 bureaus that we have that are still remaining in the stormwater utility. All the others have been moved into the general fund per the ordinance and are funded with the additional real estate tax. The middle column is basically additional BMP crews for operation and maintenance that had been approved from a previous year fee increase. We have 5 FTEs and some additional equipment for BMP maintenance crews so we can move forward with our maintenance actions on BMPs. And then the right-hand column is additional requested crews to establish a 5-year cleaning cycle on our stormwater pipe systems. This is not a repair type CIP. This is just to do the maintenance and the cleaning to help with the flood control issues. This chart just kind of further breaks that out, but it also shows the past fiscal year FTE gains that we've seen in flood control, water quality, and operations and maintenance. In FY21, we're looking at 5 FTEs in our water quality group, and then another 5 that had been previously approved in operations and maintenance, and then another 14 that was part of that proposed pipe crews that I've just shown you. What we're also looking at is in our out years, due to the if we move forward with the additional funding request, I'm going to need additional staffing to help with help manage and help operate and track those particular programs. Now to summarize, and I can have Phil come back up here also if there's additional questions. We realize that flood control continues to be a critical neighborhood issue, and there's just no simple answer to it. We have to address those issues and clean our pipes, make sure they're sized properly, and take care of the system. Stormwater regulations and permitting requirements are still challenging us. We have to adhere to those even as city forces. We require the contractors to do that whenever they're building new development or installing pipes. We operate by the same rules. The more complex projects with the new pump stations and the new stormwater flood control projects are going to make it even more challenging on operation and maintenance to upkeep that so that it maintains its operational requirements. Everybody's aware of the aging infrastructure problem we've been dealing with. The city's grown very fast and very large, and we are trying to maintain it as best we can. But as we get older with that system, it takes more time and more effort to do that. And then finally, just wanted to clarify that none of these include anything to address sea level rise options. We're still awaiting reports on that, and as that comes in later in the year, we can start incorporating some of that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? John?
I'll yield to Mike and then Barbara.
Well, I want to thank both of you for this presentation. And since you indicated at the beginning that this is a high-level conversation and presentation, I'll try to keep my remarks at a high level as well. I think the information you presented here emphasizes the challenge that we have in front of us to ensure that homes and neighborhoods are not subject to recurrent flooding and to sea level rise. And the solutions are going to require council collaborating and the collaboration with the community as well. The general public is going to require all of us invested in this conversation. I think that the numbers you presented with the unfunded projects reflect a need for state and federal participation in these projects as well, and I hope that as we move forward, we'll be able to work with state and federal partners in order to secure the funding necessary so that the entire burden of this isn't placed upon the residents of Virginia Beach. And finally, I think we really need to take a closer look at the ratio of investment between maintenance and the flood control projects. I've been speaking with many members of the Virginia Beach community who are concerned about the discussion about maintenance. So we may need to, in my view, take a look at what is that ratio and how are we funding the maintenance versus new flood control projects, because I think residents expect at minimum that the systems that are in place are operating at their capacity, even if that capacity is more limited than is required, is smaller than the need. So those are just a few of my reflections on this discussion, and I'll try to keep more specific feedback for discussions we have in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Henley?
Those of you who've been around a while know what I'm going to say, because it's what I've been saying, I guess, for the last 3 years since we really were looking at this major projects list. When you look on page 6 of this brochure, whatever, it might be slide 6, the major flood control projects for the CIP from 2021 to 2026, with this list of projects, there is not one that's in the southern watersheds. And we know, because I've been reminding you, that the southern watershed is different from the Chesapeake watershed. And the southern watershed is 65% of the city. And to look at this, and if we're talking about committing our CIP through 2026 with this hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's not one project in the southern watershed, I really can't go there. But our problem is not primarily stormwater. Our problem is wind tide flooding. And we're not talking about 20 or 30 years from now. It's a problem right now, and it's critical. And it really needs to be addressed. I know that last line in your presentation says none of this addresses sea level rise. Well, we're talking somewhat sea level rise, but I think we're talking, it's a lot of, I hate to say the phrase, climate change. The very fact, and I think in some of the analysis that we're going to see from the Dewberry work, we are seeing much more prolonged southerly winds over the last several years, whether that's permanent or not. But that's our problem, and it's not just a matter of cleaning out a couple of ditches. As a matter of fact, in many instances, if we clean out the ditch, we're just going to be allowing the floodwaters to come in faster. And so we're looking at something much more than maintenance, although that's important. Don't want to say it's not. But we are facing this issue of wind tide flooding in instances when it's not raining, it's just wind blowing. And of course, it's the water blowing up from the Currituck Sound, and I know Mr. Leahy likes to say an unlimited amount, up into essentially North Bay. And then there's no place for it to go except to come on up until the wind stops blowing from the south and shifts to the north. And what we really have to look for, if it's possible, is a way to get that water to the Atlantic Ocean faster than having to blow back down to the Oregon Inlet. And I'm not sure how possible that is, but if we can't create an outlet or a way for it to relieve that pressure valve, then at least we need to slow it down. And I think some of the recommendations we see in the nature-based part of the sea level adaptation study does address some possible ways of possibly slowing it down. But it's critical. It's critical now. It's not critical in 6 years. It's not critical in 20 years. It's critical now. And we really have to look at, possibilities. And I just say this because in going forward with this CIP, I really hope we can make sure there's some funding in here to start addressing some things in the southern watershed. And if it's not addressing the flooding, we need to look at what about these roads, particularly the evacuation routes that flood at the drop of a hat anymore. Doesn't take much, and you've got water on the roads, and particularly, I think we didn't have as much rain in 2019 as we did in 2018, but in 2018, I believe all 3 evacuation routes were closed 2 or 3 times, and that's scary, because I had never seen that before. So whether we're looking at elevating some roads, and I know y'all are looking at the cost, that's expensive, but that might have to be a part of our addressing this issue. So I'm just kind of saying all this to go on record and saying, when I look at these projects, and I know they're all needed and they're all in the northern part of the city, but the southern watershed's got some pretty critical issues right now too. And I know, and I really hate to even mention it, but the Asheville Park project seems to get an awful lot of attention, and we do have Phase 1 fully funded. The city's portion should be finished, I guess, next year, and of course the developer's portion is kind of held up by the court case. But there's a lot of concern that project gets a lot of attention because of the pump. But I want to just share some information with you, which I think is very interesting, because so much of the attention is, well, it's that pumping from Asheville Park. I asked last week when I had my forum to have information on just how much pumping that pump has done this year. We know that the intent is to only pump it when there is a forecast for an excessive amount of rainfall. I think it's kind of targeted at more than 3 inches. All right, so in 2019, well, one thing we were doing was a very extensive water quality test to see if there were any problems coming from those BMPs in Asheville Park. So there had to be some water captured to do those water quality testing things. So on January 11th, the pump ran for 15 minutes to allow some water to be captured. And then on February 26th, the pump ran for another 15 minutes to get a quality test from another situation. Well, in September, we had Dorian coming down, facing us, and the projection, I think, was that we were going to get 5 to 8 inches of rain, so that's in that area of excessive rain. So on September 3rd, the pump ran for approximately 7 hours. And then it ran again on September 4th for approximately 8 hours. So for all of 2019, that pump has run about 15 and a half hours at different times. All of this problem we're having is not coming from that project. And I just share that information with you for your information. We've really got a lot of really tough questions because we don't control the wind, and I don't know how in the world we can possibly control the wind. And we don't control rain amounts, and we don't control when the rain comes down at the time when we've had a lot of southern winds. That's really bad. So we've got issues here, and I just want to make sure these issues stay before you and remind you that I think that 4 of you have some portions of your districts in the southern watershed. Not much, but all Princess Anne's in the southern watershed, but some portions of Beach and Kempsville and Centerville, and I think maybe Rose Hall are also in the southern watershed. And it's really something we really need to look at. It operates differently. Nobody thinks you're understanding anything when you start talking wind tide, but it's unique. I'm not sure how many other places in the world have wind tides, but we do. And it's a major problem, and to solve it, we don't do it in the same way we do it in the northern part of the city. So I don't know how many times I've said all of that, but I just thought I'd say it one more time. Thank you.
Mr. Moss.
Thank you. Well, I've talked about flooding a lot myself. And we had an opportunity last May to elevate roads, but we chose a different budget solution than the one that Mrs. Abbott and I proposed. So some of the problems we have is because we've refused to make the tough choices to make flooding a top priority, but that's another issue for another day. But I do think one of the biggest, and I've provided some very detailed comments on this brief to the city manager, and I shared those with the mayor, and I'll share them with all of you later, so I won't go into all those details here today. But I think a fundamental issue that we have never fundamentally addressed is the sourcing strategy for executing these projects. We've made the presumption that the best way to solve these projects and manage these projects is to organically increase our staff by a big number. All of us know that the productive work hour of government is about 300 to 400 hours less than the private sector. The private sector doesn't carry a 23% pension benefit liability cost. These projects on a capital side are not for the 20, 25-year career of an employee. So I think we really have to revisit the sourcing strategy for the execution of our projects and find out how we can leverage the expertise of people who do big projects so that we can compress the timelines and we are not limited by our organic staff, plus our inability to even hire the organic staff. So I think we really have to rethink the sourcing strategy of how we're going about this. And I couldn't think more about in terms of the balance between showing how the model, we've paid a lot of money for this model, we evaluate developments by the model, but nothing in these presentations tell us, if I looked at the model today, because I've asked many times that we get a presentation and show us the model and show us how these things will operate differently, but I don't know the performance improvement that I'm getting. So I think we need to know, what does the model say should be the right priority if we're looking for the biggest risk mitigation for both the time and the money available? We're paying a lot of money for the model. What does the model analytically suggest should be the right mix? I think that's important that we should know. I think that's a top line part of it. And I know I've mentioned this before, so I won't get here, but I think we also have not done a right approach of trying to go out and rather than singularly looking at all the projects and permitting them one by one, I don't know that we've actually put together a narrative story to try to get a much larger permit for our projects in total, leveraging our model data analysis and whatnot, and approaching the regulatory bodies both in Washington. I think this administration is very receptive to different approaches, but have we looked at how we can change and do a better look at how maybe an omnibus permit, and then there's less checkoffs for individual projects, which reduces our timeline? I don't think we have used our data and our analysis sufficiently in our engagement to look for a different way to execute our programs. And instead, we've been comfortable with following the as-is process when the risk exposure for time, we only have to get one of those big storms like Houston got, and our whole economy and our tax base is diminished in a significant way. So there ought to be a sense of urgency, and the governor ought to have a sense of urgency, and DEQ ought to have a sense of urgency, and we've got to be able to find a way to not have to have every little project the same length. There has to be an innovative way to approach that and still meet the compliance of the intent of the policy. And I think we need to be striving on that. Maybe we ought to be individually ourselves or as a group approaching our legislators and those political appointees to recognize the severity of our problem, that time is a resource. And every day we're exposed, that's a more risk factor. And I just think we could, that's a big picture thing, I think, that we could kind of work on, I would hope. And I do think we have to have, in all these cases, and I know the maintenance, I concur with Mike's point, is why build new if you can't maintain what you have? I'd like that to be a policy across the board in the city, but here would be a good start, because it is true that the best protection we could get is like you can see in the plaza. We've got a lot of protection, not as much as we'd like, but going from 6 inches to 5 feet of drainage capacity is a big improvement. And I think there's lots of places in the city, I think, where that would hold true, Mr. Mayor, I think. And so I think that is to know what that right balance is, but we can't borrow money for maintenance. So I understand that creates different funding streams, But I think we as a council want to know what that option is, and then I don't want you to take risks for us, is what I'm kind of saying. Let us decide we want to take the risk, and we owe the public why we did it. But I think they are after us about the maintenance, and everything isn't maintenance. Barbara, Mrs. Henley is correct. There are some soft policies, but this, as I said before, this timeline, I think we don't articulate the risk that this timeline represents. And if we're going to have a bond referendum in November, and we haven't made that decision yet, but if we are, as I've shared with the city manager and mayor, the narrative that we need to talk about that has to talk and translate what does this mean to residents, just like that person that had their house lifted and their flood insurance rate went from $10,490, I think it was, that's close, to $540. That's a big savings. People in Plaza today have $2,700, $3,000 flood insurance, and some can't afford it. So I think as we look at this, time has a value of money, has a value of money to those people. So I just think we have to think about the programmatics are good, but what's the story in terms of if we're going to get people to buy in, are we moving across and are we using the model to set our priorities so we know what's being done based on data? And there does need to be, Mrs. Henley's right, some kind of, like everybody's at the family table, everybody wants to get dessert, so there has to be some way to look like there's some balance, but still priorities in the science should be driving our choices to the extent that that's doable. And that would be my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I have a couple of questions. Sure. Mr. Mayor. What are we doing to coordinate our efforts on stormwater with Chesapeake and Norfolk in particular, and so that we're not conflicting with what they're doing, and in fact, we are measurably improving our product along with their product? What are we doing in that regard?
Well, there's a couple answers to that, and I'll ask Phil to chime in a little bit on with the city of Norfolk. We recently completed the new spillway between Lake Smith and Lake Lowry so that we could reduce the level to allow for additional flood water and capacity in the system for Lake Smith as far as coordination with Norfolk. For maintenance efforts with City of Chesapeake, whenever we're doing ditch work or channels that will flow into or out of Chesapeake, we try to coordinate with them to let them be aware that we are doing work so we can try to get a dual benefit from that.
Is there anything going on in reference to what Mrs. Henley was referring to in the Chesapeake that is adjacent to the southern portion of the city?
Not that I'm aware of.
If I may, we are working with Norfolk in the joint land use study and the Navy to look at common flooding problems within the two cities and how they affect the military. Much of what you've seen today is work that would occur in our neighborhoods, and the way we have developed, we don't develop our neighborhoods across the city boundaries, so there isn't a lot of connection there, except as Phil indicated, where there is a common watershed, we work together. In our request to the Corps of Engineers, and that we are pushing in both New York and now Washington, D.C., for a 3x3x3 study, we brought out that needed to be more regional in scope and include looking at North Carolina, Norfolk, and Chesapeake. Because the way the federal rules have worked to date, it produces some fairly silly results. Norfolk went through its 3x3x3 study, and for the proposals on the Elizabeth River, they had to move them so far up the river in order to not involve Virginia Beach or Chesapeake, because that's the way the federal rules worked. Our seawater rise modeling has identified that one of the major solutions for the Elizabeth River is a tide gate and pump station that would actually start in Chesapeake on one side of the river and end in Norfolk on the other, and it would provide protection to Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Chesapeake. So we are at that point of trying to we're at the beginning points of working with our neighbors. The federal process to date sometimes has kept us apart, and again, the fact that our development, when we are looking at infrastructure in neighborhoods, that tends to naturally keep us apart because the neighborhoods just don't cross city boundaries.
And if I could say, Mr. Jones, I've had conversations with Mayor Alexander in Norfolk and also Rick West in Chesapeake, who really border us. And we're going to, try to use certain resources, especially ODU, who has a, center for this, going forward. And their new city manager, Chip Filer, was an expert at ODU prior to. And so leveraging university resources and combining some of the things that we have in common. And I think we're also potentially with Lynnhaven River now talking about a symposium, after the first of the year and, some other initiatives. So we do have this spirit of collaboration. Ms. Henley?
And just to chime in, of course, with the southern watersheds, we have to make sure we are relating with North Carolina. With the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we're at the foot. At the Albemarle watershed, we're the headwaters. But that also complicates our doing anything. If we try to do anything up here, we have to make sure we're not adversely impacting the people in North Carolina. And many of you know that over the past 2 years, we've been working to build this relationship with North Carolina. We've had a couple of symposiums, and we continue to work with North Carolina the best we can, particularly the APNET, the Albemarle-Pamlico National Estuarine Partnership, which is very active in North Carolina, and as well as the universities in North Carolina, as well as in Virginia, and the research work, because it's pretty touchy. We can't do anything up here that causes the water to build up in North Carolina. When it's trying to come up here, it just goes back and forth. It just sloshes back and forth like a major bathtub. And so it does make it much more difficult, but I think as long as we all understand we're trying to work for solutions that are not adversely impacting each other, and I think we've built a very good relationship so far. I don't know with the politicians with North Carolina and Virginia, but I think our local folks and the research institutions and so forth are working very well together. And we're certainly sharing our information as it's being developed with them and them with us. So when we're dealing with different states, it's even bigger than if we're dealing with different municipalities. But we are working on it, and I think we're doing our best anyway, and I think it's been successful so far.
Yes,
I
John.
just want to I know a lot of people have talked, I'd set expectations, I think, with the public that are probably not realistic, that there's going to be this big source of federal and state funding. Anyone who reads the congressional budget forecast reports and sees that trillion-dollar deficits are running through 2029, and by 2029, the discretionary, which means the non-entitlement spending of the federal government, will be less than 5% and could be zero, depending upon the cost of borrowing debt. So I think anyone who thinks the federal government has this tremendous fiscal capacity to be a source of grants and borrowing or lending is probably the best we can hope for, is maybe private borrowing that gets discounted credits against their interest rates. I don't think we should be thinking there's this big pool of direct grants coming from the federal government. And when you look at what we're asking the state to do with regards to Medicaid, which is the 900-pound gorilla in the state's budget, and education, which we're asking them to do tremendous things to reduce some burden here, I think that reality, whatever we do, most of the burden, we may not like it, will actually fall upon ourselves. And I think anyone who thinks that there's this mythical other group that's going to show up with their wallet, I think that's an unrealistic expectation. And we're going to have to collectively, I think, Mr. Mayor, as a public, decide how much risk we want to bear, which means we want to take, and how much of that risk we want to buy down. It will not be cheap. It will not be revenue-free. And will take a lot of education, a lot of cooperation on this group, I think, to get there. But we shouldn't be thinking that there's going to be a magic credit card coming from the Washington or the Commonwealth, I think, to help us pay our bills. I hope the public's watching, but that's just not a realistic message.
Okay, anybody else at this point? Okay, thank you all very much. Okay, at this point, the chair will entertain a motion to recess into a closed session pursuant to the exemptions from open meetings allowed by Section 2.23711A Code of Virginia as amended for the following purpose. Public contract, discussion of the award of public contract involving the expenditure of public funds and discussion of the terms or scope of such a contract where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.23711A 29, specifically executive search firm selection. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? Okay, roll call?
You can actually vote if you'd like.
You like it?
Ah, there we go.
By a vote of 10-0, you recess into closed session.
Okay,
11-0, I'm sorry.
we are in recess to,